We've all been there, right? You make a promise, maybe you even sign a contract, and then, boom, something totally out of your control happens, and suddenly you can't follow through. It's a real nightmare scenario. So what does the law have to say when a promise becomes literally impossible to keep? Let's dive in. So let's really picture this. You've signed a legally binding agreement. You've dotted the I's, crossed the T's. Then, out of the blue, some freak event just completely torpedoes your plans. The question is simple, but it's a scary one. Are you still on the hook? Are you legally required to do the impossible?
Let's make this super real. You booked the absolute perfect venue for your wedding. It's your dream spot. A week before the big day, it burns to the ground. Total tragedy. Now, obviously, they can't host your wedding, but what about the money, the deposit you paid, the final payment that's due? Do you still have to pay for a venue that isn't even there anymore? This is exactly the kind of mess where the law has to have an answer.
And thankfully, it does. The law provides this fascinating solution. It's a legal concept called the Doctrine of Frustration. And honestly, the best way to think of it is like a hidden escape hatch in contract law, designed for these exact kinds of impossible situations. So what is this thing exactly? Well, put simply, the Doctrine of Frustration says that if some crazy, out-of-the-blue event happens, something totally unforeseen and outside of anyone's control, and it makes the contract physically or legally impossible to perform, then poof, the contract just automatically ends. Both sides are released from their promises. Now, this idea is not new at all. It's actually rooted in this classic Latin legal maxim. It sounds fancy, I know, but it's been a core principle of fairness in the law for centuries, and it perfectly captures the whole idea. And what that all boils down to is something beautifully simple. The law does not force you to do something you physically cannot do. It's a recognition that holding someone to an impossible promise is just, well, it's just not fair. It's a legal way of saying, yeah, there are limits to what a contract can demand. But, and this is a big but, you can't just throw your hands up and say your contract is frustrated because things got a little tough. This escape hatch, it has some very specific locks on it. And to use it, you have to meet 4 key conditions. All right, let's break these down. 1. The event has to be genuinely out of the blue, something you couldn't have reasonably predicted. 2. It's got to be completely beyond anyone's control. 3, and this is the big one, it has to make doing the thing impossible, illegal, or so completely different that the whole point of the contract is gone. And finally, number 4, you can't have caused the problem yourself. No self-induced frustration. Let's look at a classic case that really set the stage for all of this. It's called Taylor versus Caldwell. A company rented a music hall for a bunch of concerts. Before the first show could even happen, the hall burned down. It wasn't anyone's fault. The court said the contract was frustrated. The logic? Super simple. The very thing the contract was about, the hall itself, was gone, destroyed. Performance was physically impossible. Okay, a building burning down, that's pretty clear-cut. But what happens in a trickier situation? What if you can technically still do your part of the deal, but the whole reason, the entire point of the contract, has just vanished? And this brings us to maybe the most famous frustration case of all, Krell versus Henry. So a guy rents an apartment for 2 days for one reason and one reason only, to watch King Edward VII's coronation parade go by. But then the king gets sick and the parade is canceled. The apartment owner still wanted his money. I mean, the room was still there, right? You could still use it. But the court said no. While physical performance was possible, the purpose of the contract was totally defeated. The whole foundation of their agreement was gone. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like a pretty good way to get out of a bad deal, but it's so important to understand the limits here. The courts are very strict about this. This is a legal escape hatch, for sure, but it's not a get-out-of-jail-free card for a contract that's just not working out the way you'd hoped. This table really lays it all out. If the thing you're contracting about is destroyed, like the music hall, yes, that's frustration. If a war breaks out and makes your contract illegal to perform, yes, that's frustration. But look at that no column. Your costs suddenly shoot up and the deal's no longer profitable? Nope, that's just business. And most important of all, if the problem is your own darn fault, absolutely no way you can't use the escape hatch. This right here, this is the single most important thing to remember. The courts have said it time and time again. A contract just becoming harder to do or more expensive or less profitable, that is not frustration. The performance has to become truly impossible or the entire purpose has to be wiped out. Difficulty is not impossibility. So how do you figure it out? You can almost think of it like this simple 3-step decision tree. Step 1. Did a totally unforeseen event happen after you signed on the dotted line? If yes, go to step 2. Did that event make the whole thing impossible or pointless? If that's a yes, then you ask the final killer question. Was it your fault? If the answer to that last one is no, well, then you just might have a frustrated contract on your hands.
So, let's say the court agrees, the contract has been officially frustrated. What happens then? What are the consequences when a contract just dies? Well, it's really all about fairness and hitting a giant reset button.
The main result is actually very clean. The second that frustrating event happens, the contract becomes void. It's over. It just ceases to exist. Both people are immediately let go from any future promises they made. The slate is wiped clean from that moment forward.
But hold on. What about the past? What about that deposit you paid for the wedding venue? This is where the law steps in to prevent something called unjust enrichment. It basically means it's not fair for one person to get a windfall from a disaster. So generally, any money paid or any major benefit that was given before the contract died has to be returned. The goal is to put everyone back as much as possible to where they were before they ever made the deal.
And that brings us to the final thought. This whole doctrine of frustration is a legal safety net, right? It's there for those truly catastrophic, couldn't see it coming events. But it really leaves us with a huge question for our own lives. The next time you make a big promise or sign a contract, have you stopped to think about what would happen if the world changes in a way you never, ever expected? Have you planned for the impossible?